Hey, and welcome back. It's the Marketer of the Day podcast with extra super special guest, Mr. Wayne Stanley from BoweDigital.com. That's BoweDigital.com. And Wayne Stanley is Bowe Digital's Chief Inspiration Officer. So Wayne leads a thriving marketing agency. They are acclaimed for website design, email marketing, and social media prowess. So we are going to find out from Wayne himself about all these amazing things they do. They do story arcs, digital checkups, new website creation, speech writing, and so much more. So we're going to find out what Wayne's done, what makes him great, and what you in the audience can do to achieve your own greatness, find what you're good at, find that ikigai, the fulfillment, the happiness, using your skills, and so much more. So Wayne, glad to be speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to get into this.
And I'm excited to talk to you. So we introduced you a little bit, hyped you up, but what's your current focus and passion? What just has you so super duper excited lately?
Super duper excited lately, I think, is being able to tell the story of a small business. I think a lot of small businesses think that they know what that is, or they feel like they've got a mission statement that they've had for a number of years. And I really love that. I feel like we've kind of figured out how to listen appropriately and be able to help them craft something that's effective and efficient for today's folks. And that's what I'm constantly thinking about, that, constantly thinking about how to do that for each of our customers. And that gets me excited to come to work every day.
Wonderful. And, I think you're so right that there are some of these problems in our business that just requires this constant reoccurring thinking. You can't just say today I'll work on my story. I'll work on my branding. It kind of takes all this time. And it always also feels like once you have it figured out and you have it out there, then the ground shifts beneath you and you have to try again. And so this whole idea of your story brand, so to speak, it seems like it's boring when it's focusing on the buzzwords, the keywords. We've been in business for 57 years. It's all about us. But then it is exciting just as kind of a layperson from the outside looking in when it's about the people you've helped and the way that you're different and stand out. But that's just first impressions. So what do you think these businesses need to know and be saying as far as having this compelling storytelling? What are the do's and don'ts?
Sure. I think you're exactly right. It can get boring or mundane, and it also feels like it's ever changing. And that is the case. And I feel like marketing in general for a lot of small businesses, I always say, is the post-it note activity. It's always if we have time this week or this month, we're going to finally start the blog we talked about, or redo our website, or whatever it may be. And when we don't have time because the rest of the business happens, it gets moved to the next post-it note. But if you're not talking about your business, who is? You're leaving it to somebody else, to competitors potentially. If you don't have competitors, if you're lucky enough to be that in that regard, then you still have customers that are maybe creating a narrative for you. And I think the two things that I like to share when it comes to creating a story for yourself is to remember that it's not a vanity exercise. For a long time, a lot of small business marketing was more vain in its effort. It was, what do I want it to tell you about me? What do I want you to know about my business? And I don't think they focus enough on their benefits and their service offerings, things like that. What's the value you're getting for what you pay me? That sort of stuff. So that's a big one. And then also, you hit the nail on the head with some of the buzzwords. They're not even buzzwords. They're just a lot of catch-all phrases these days. The one that I preach on the most is definitely customer service. We have so many that say, the bedrock of our story is that we offer great customer service. One of the best and worst things about today's world is that we can get whatever customer service we want. So if you want a completely digitized customer service that's super flexible, fully online and all of that, you may have other customers that want to be in a storefront, or to be able to touch and feel something, or to talk to someone or whatever. And based on what those two groups want, one is a 5-star rating for their customer service and one is a 1-star rating, and you have to be able to figure out what that is. And so I think the more that you can be specific in your story to articulate that better, you're going to have more success in what you pull together.
I love it. That's huge. That what you think is obvious, or what your impression of customer service is. For example, someone might have a whole completely different idea. So we have to be specific. And so as far as how this ties into what you do, like, is there a particular like industry or business that you've helped that like stands out from the rest that you really feel like talking about?
Sure. I mean, we got our start in the real estate title space, and that grew into real estate and financial services in general. So I think those are kind of our two main, anything from real estate agents and mortgage lenders to community banks and credit unions to other insurance services. Those are kind of our big three that we help with a lot. And it's a crowded space. So there's a lot of competition in those industries. And that's where we've really created a niche and tried to create ways to work with these folks that are budget friendly, but also giving them unique marketing tools. Because I just feel like in today's world, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg to promote your business, and it doesn't have to be as complicated as some feel or fear that it is.
And it sounds like you can make it fun. And so what's your process like? So say you go to one of these title companies, like where do you even begin? Is it a matter of like seeing what they've already marketed, talking to customers? Like where do you even start as far as the brainstorming?
Yeah, we do a couple of different things. One of them that I love is called we call it our digital checkup, where we look at everything that's happening for that company in the digital space, everything that they've created, other things that might have been created on their behalf, anywhere we can find it online. We also look, it's called digital checkup, but we look at anything they've done physically as well, print, ads, and handouts and giveaways and otherwise. We look at all of that, but then we go on site with them and we really try to think through what do people love the most about your business, and how do we get more people to love that? Because if we can figure out what your customers are on fire about and what your teams are on fire about, we can spread that enthusiasm to others. There's a quote that I love that says that enthusiasm is one of the most contagious feelings there can be. And so you have to harness that enthusiasm for your company, your brand, your service, whatever it may be, and figure out how to get others to do that. And so when we go on site, one of the first things we do is we always bring Play-Doh, and we have them do a Play-Doh activity to really get their minds off of, because whenever we talk about marketing, especially if you're not a marketer and been brought into this meeting or into conversations about this, you're still thinking about your inbox, you're thinking about the meetings that you have today and tomorrow, and you're not really in it. And so we do a Play-Doh activity where we just ask everyone to create, why does this business thrive, like what really makes this business special, because that's the foundation of the conversation that day. And it makes them immediately kind of think differently, put down their phones, think very differently about the company, what they do for the company, and all of that kind of stuff. But we also, the other piece that makes that piece, the storytelling piece, different for us is that we also talk to their customers, and we try to do that before we go on site with them. Sometimes we can't make that happen, but it can't be a survey monkey. This type of stuff, to like really hone in on your story, shouldn't be some sort of digital survey. It's really conversations on the phone, leaders on your team, maybe not your sales folks, maybe true leaders, whether that's C-suite or owners, whatever that may look like, to have conversations to say, what do you love? You always say we have 5 stars from you, but if we were going to aim for a 6 star, what would that look like? And really pressing them on like, what's the best, what's the worst, all that kind of stuff. And, just trying to see what they love the most, because we want to compare that to what's happening with their internal team, because sometimes that matches and sometimes it misses. And so we can't, always figure out what to do and how that might work and everything as far as that goes.
Wonderful. And so I'm like, the lesson I'm getting from this is that, there's a difference between like the day-to-day tasks and I've got to go to these meetings, this inbox, versus there's the business has been held back this whole time, and we need to pursue this new way of thinking, and we really need to focus, and we really need to just be in the present moment and think some of these things through and put this sort of deep thought into it. And as you said, find the enthusiasm. And what's great about the idea of listening is that you've done all these things, right? You do the digital checkup, and they kind of put things out in the world. They've made the customers, think a certain way, and then you go back and you see like what's reflected back to you, which might just be kind of as a result of the randomness you didn't even realize that you were doing. And so when you're kind of doing all this research, right, looking at what they've done, what the team thinks, what the customers say. Like, is there anything that like usually jumps out at you? Is it like the repeat stories or like certain phrases? Like, what is the output or end result of this research?
I would say that most of the time, what folks internally want to focus on are things that they've invested in. So we need to focus on technology and infrastructure and the training that we've done, or things that are budget line items. Like, we've invested in this, we need to talk about it. We built this office, we added this service, whatever it may be. Let's talk about it. And what we hear most of the time from the customer is that a lot of that is the sort of vanilla, or I'm sorry, the sprinkles on top, but what they really love the most are the humans on the team. It's the human connection and that's not the case for every single industry, but I would say for a lot of industries, especially if you're anything in the service space, it is individuals that they really are in love with, and the way that they emulate your brand, your story, and all of that as a human is what connects folks. And that's sometimes hard for owners and managers to reconcile, like, oh, well, we want to talk about this because we just invested all of this, but you're saying that they actually care that somebody has this really soft touch approach, or that they are super communicative, or whatever that looks like. And that's why a lot of times when we help people with their story, I say we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not trying to come up with something super salacious or crazy or really out there for you. I say a lot, we're really just trying to take your story that you have and make it more effective and more efficient in today's world. And so it's combining those two things of, if this is what you think is important internally, how do we mirror that, or match it to what your customers think are important, so that both of those things are happening and you've got a real cohesive story. But the other important piece is it's got to be able to adapt and evolve as your business does. Because a lot of people think, we created our story, now we can close the book and people just check it out and read it, or however we're going to talk about it. But your story 2 months before the pandemic was very different. 6 months into it looks very different than today. Your story should be able to evolve as your company does, and not just with new services or locations or people, but just in general, the way you operate likely changes. And so it's good to check in on your story every year or so to make sure that it's still working for you.
Wonderful. And so this whole idea of, it's not necessarily about, as you said, like being super salacious. It's that you probably are saying these things, or maybe you're close to saying these things, but it's a matter of just like refining your story. And like, for some reason, the analogy that always pops in my head is like a stand-up comedian, right? If you're a stand-up comedian and you're touring the country, you say a lot of stuff, and then you go and you try it out in different audiences, and you say, well, more of this, less of that, or like cut out that story or make that story longer. And then also over the years, if you were like if you kept doing it, then your own material would evolve as well. And so that's kind of at least in my mind, like a fun way of thinking about it. And so you're figuring out, okay, like, what are they, and also an interesting kind of like advice that we keep touching on here is this idea that even though your company has put a lot of time and money into the infrastructure, or the building, or the customer service, or whatever, then even though that excites you because you sunk into that, that's not necessarily what excites others. And so we have to find that kind of golden material. And so once you figure out, okay, like our message should be this, and here's some cool stories, and here's where people get enthusiastic, how does that then translate to, you make the web pages, the videos, the social media content? What's that step like?
That's one of our favorite pieces, because then we can get creative with, this is, and it's something that we do, like when we create a story for a customer, we kind of go to step 1A to this, or 1B, however you want to look at it, and think about, what does this look like in practice? Because some people, when we first started out and we were doing some of our story arc process for some of our customers, they would say, is this just a PowerPoint, or just, words on a page that we have to then figure out what to do with? And so we try to paint the picture of, what are some marketing campaigns that you could do with a story like this? What are ways that you can engage your customers? How can you use this for more customer reviews and things like that? And so as we're crafting the literal story, we're also thinking about, are you comfortable with how we're picturing this put into process? For me, it's kind of like when you develop a logo, one of my big questions is always, how does this look embroidered? Like because that's hard for a lot of folks. They'll come up with this complex logo, and then they go to put on a hat or a sweater and it looks terrible. And you have to think about small stuff like that. Or if you had it on a giant sign, what would that look like? And the same is for your story. Like, this sounds great, or you've got all these good words to it, but what does this look like visually? How does this work? And in some ways you sort of turn into, like, when you're working on a movie or a TV show and you've really got to storyboard it a little bit to think through, if this is what we want to say, how does this visually look? How does this go into a website that we've already invested tons of money in? How does this work with our sales folks? If you happen to have a sales team that's out there having conversations, how do you make sure that it's truly going to be integrated in what you do? Because if you don't do that piece, if you don't make sure that it's going to be integrated into your overall business and your strategy and everything else, it's going to fail. It's just, or maybe not fail, maybe that's too strong of a word, but it's going to not be as effective as it could have been. And so we do that. We even think about, like, from the person that answers your phone to the person that cleans the office to C-suite level owners, all of that kind of stuff. Everybody has to be bought in and understand why we made this change. Because I've experienced companies before where I've seen them make a change, and you can kind of see in marketing emails or something that, oh, it looks like they're talking about themselves differently. And I'll go up to them at a trade show or something and I'll say, tell me about this. Like, what's new and different? And they'll say, oh, it's just marketing. They just changed colors, or they just did this because they had the budget this year. And immediately my interest goes away. But if you're capturing someone because they've noticed you're doing it different, you really have to figure out how to connect with them better and differently. And that's part of creating the story if you're really doing it effectively.
I love it. So don't just go through the motions, or don't just update the marketing because it's been a year and you have to. Do it because it's the right thing to do and it excites you. And that way, the end result is when someone then asks you about this change you've made, then you can have a real answer instead of just passing it off. And so we mentioned a little bit about some of these companies that you've helped, but I love if it's possible to get kind of like a case study success story so we can fully understand the before and after that happened. So does anything come to mind as far as like some company that you helped where they needed your help and you did all these things and it ended up in the end super great?
Yeah, I'll give you one that's a good anecdote because it's not super data driven, but I think sometimes the data driven stories can scare some small business owners because they think, well, we can't match those numbers, or we can't get to that level of whatever that is. So one of the ones I love is that I think a lot of people can relate to, is we got brought in to help this brand that had been in business for over 70 years at that point, and they have the same story all along. And they're a very successful brand. They're out in the West Coast, and very successful brand. They were active in over 7 different states, lots of different locations, thousands of employees, and they were doing well. They didn't really have competitors. Like, it was fantastic, but they were trying to think about the next phase of their business. They can see that competitors could easily come into their markets and all of that. And we got brought in to do our on-site, and a woman that had worked there for 50 plus of the 70 years that they had been in business came up to me right in my face, and she said, I don't know how you think after a 4-hour workshop that you can understand the soul of this company. And I said, I take that very serious, and it's one of the greatest challenges of what we do. And we went through the entire process. We went through everything that I've described today. We did the Play-Doh activity. We did the interviews. We met with folks ad nauseum. We talked about how this is going to look, how we want to train their sales teams afterwards, how we want to train their admin folks, and all of that kind of stuff. What does this play into the future? And also even started brainstorming what the next chapter looked like of that story that we might come up with a year or two down the road. And when it finally got time to unveil it to the team, I made sure that she was front and center in the audience because I wanted her feedback first. And she came up to us after we presented everything, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, I cannot believe that you guys figured out how to not only explain what we do and how we do it and why we do it, but also somehow completely re-energized me to want to continue to do this work for a long time. And she talked about how being in the business for so long that she's been in, and having the same story to tell, that she kind of felt like she was being super repetitive all the time, saying the same thing over and over again, and that she didn't have the same excitement to get people going about the brand. And she said, I just feel like I've got a whole new level of enthusiasm that I can bring to what I do every day. And so that was that was really a win-win for us, and for a lot of businesses, that's something that's a struggle, is the internal buy-in. So that was a good win for us, and something that I think helps a lot of folks.
And you tackled it head on. You said, "Hey, here's this person where if we kind of just like brush her off or ignore her, she might talk to other people on the team. She might derail us. So instead, she came to us and she had a real concern. So we'll keep her in mind. We'll make sure like she's been there for 50 years. She was the most vocal. Her opinion is very important. So we'll make sure that, as you said, keep her front and center. Find out from her first what the opinion is. And I find this idea very interesting of like keeping up or renewing the energy, which is it's sometimes tough to do, right? It takes like additional people or like new ways of thinking just to take the same old business and even just update it from something that's been like a few years out of date. And so out of everything that you've learned here from the like finding the excitement and finding like the new ways of marketing the same thing, like in these last 2 minutes, do you have any advice for us if we feel like, oh, well, a lot like the book's 3 years out of date, the website's 2 years out of date, the marketing's like a year or two out of date, and like it's just sometimes it's hard to get the fun back. What do you have to say about just getting the sparks reignited?
Yeah, I think number one, listen. You got to listen to your team and your customers, and truly listen to learn. Don't just, again, it's not just a blank survey that you take, and it's not a gut check of are we on the right path. It's really, how is this working? How are we doing it? So that's number one. And then I think number two, you're right. It is, some people see it as a burden. Some people see it as overwhelming. And so I often tell folks, you got to start by doing more, and more is more. So whatever that is for you, like you said, if the website's out, everything feels out of date, start with one thing. Really focus in, just as much as you're going to focus in on the listening that you do to create that story, focus in on what you can do with the resources and the time that you have, because there's always a list. There's always a million. We're a marketing company, and I have a list every day of stuff that I wish we did better and different in terms of our own marketing. And I think that doesn't end for anybody. And so start small and figure out what works for you in terms of what is more.
I think that's very helpful that we like the to-do list never ends, and we have a set amount of resources, set amount of time, and then we choose what to focus on, and we can either make excuses and say, oh, someday when there's less customers coming in the door or when the website traffic's done, but like that someday you'll be busy with something else. So it's like, well, find the time, block it out, reconfigure, squeeze in, make it a priority, have some kind of recurring appointment reminder and work on some of this stuff. And as you said, figure out whatever it takes to do more. And when I hear that, I think, well, 10% more, 20% more, put in an hour a day or hour a week into whatever kind of change you want to make. I think that's very helpful. And it's different for everybody, right? So,
Right.
so unfortunately, we have to be sort of vague there because everyone has their own kind of obligations, responsibilities, and I think we at least all have that list that you mentioned there of like, oh, if only I had like, if there were 10 of me, if I had 100 hours a day, oh, I'd fix up the website, I'd go on my podcast, all those other things. And so with all the things on the should list, is there any like number one low hanging fruit that you see businesses, companies out there? Is there something that they should all be maybe thinking about more that they aren't?
Yes, they should be thinking about video. And again, whether you feel like you're already doing lots of video, or you are trying to figure out how to get started in it, it's still one of the most engaging ways that you can put your brand, your story, your product out there. And lots of folks get very nervous about it, but there are a million ways to do video these days. And again, it's a more is more thing for me. If you're doing one a month now, try to figure out how to do one every other week. If you're trying to figure out how to get started, but you're scared of your own voice, your own appearance, whatever it is, those are the two things I hear the most from people. I think you've got to, if it's not you, then who? And figure out on your team who can be that person, or who can you outsource it to that can be a voice for your company or can help create that for you. But it's something that you can't ignore, and that every business can do more of, and it will only result in more engagement and activity. I can promise that.
I love it. And there's so many times when I'm interested in either business specifically or something they do, and I go to YouTube and I'm just like, what kind of videos are out there? And what's great about your thinking, your advice here is that you're saying, well, if some business owner out there says, oh, I can't do video, and they just kind of like block you at every turn, you're saying, well, someone else on your team can do it. It's something you can outsource. So don't necessarily just give up on video entirely. There's many ways, many paths that it can get done. And all of our conversation here just makes me think that it helps to get outside of one's head, and it helps to speak to a person and a team such as yourself to make us realize what's possible and how the path forward as far as getting more leads, getting more people in the door, more website traffic, more social media attention, whatever the goal is. It helps to have a team that knows what to do, but also can avoid the mistakes. Like when you mentioned about like the branding and the logo, and that can definitely be a beginner mistake of like making the logo or the branding where it can't be used in other places. So it helps to speak to someone who knows what they're doing, who can get excited about our business. And so how do we do that? If we want to check out bowedigital.com, how should we contact you? How should we maybe get a conversation started?
Yeah, I love to reach out to people, and we do brainstorming all the time. It's not a sales pitch or anything like that. I genuinely love to just think differently for folks, and so I'm always happy to have the conversation. And all of my socials are linked. That's the easiest way I think people like to get in touch, whether it's a LinkedIn message or otherwise. And you can go to bowedigital.com. That's BOWE digital.com, and all of it's there. And I'm happy to chat.
Fantastic. Well, Mr. Wayne Stanley from bowedigital.com and Bowe Digital on all social media platforms, wherever you like to hang out. If you're a LinkedIn, Instagram person, etc., you find Wayne Stanley, you have that conversation. As he said, it's not a sales pitch. You're just talking about ideas. And it also, there's a thing in programming called the rubber duck method, right? Where you say, well, I hold a rubber duck in front of me and I talk to it and I say, hey, here's my problem. And many business owners, I'm sure, they're not even sure what the problem is. Oh, I don't have enough Facebook reach. Well, why is that? Are you posting? Are you doing video? Are you doing interesting things? And you just talk to someone, even if you don't think that they'll have any like mind-blowing advice, just like stating the problem, making it concrete can definitely help. And so you talk to Mr. Wayne Stanley and his team, you make these problems clear, they give you some advice, they give you some next steps, maybe they can help you, maybe they can do some cool stuff for you. So that's bowedigital.com, BOWE digital.com. And as we wrap up, wind down our conversation here, Wayne, I'd like to stump my guest a little bit at the very end to put them on the spot and ask for a fun quote or lesson that can get us excited. You used the word before, enthusiastic. So does anything come to mind as far as a quote or lesson to get us enthusiastic about possibilities in the future?
I think that the quote that I would use is "Get Scrappy." It's a book by Nick Westergaard. It's really wonderful for small businesses when it comes to their marketing. And I think that in today's world, when you're thinking about tighter budgets, tighter time, people's attention spans, competition, all of that kind of stuff, people still want to emulate, or they look at big brands and they just think, oh, I could never do that. And I love the idea of just get scrappy with what you're doing. Figure out how to make it work for you. Steal the little pieces that you can, or emulate what you can, and don't be afraid to use it in a way that makes sense for you. And whether you go to classes, you spent time on this podcast listening to this today, whatever it may be, like, be selfish with your time. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out to me. And I think being scrappy with that mindset with your marketing can really help you feel like you're breaking out of that box, whether you're feeling redundant or you feel like you're not doing enough or whatever it may be. I think that can be super helpful.
100%. I agree. It's way too easy to forget that you and I are real people here doing a podcast, right? You watch the YouTube videos, you listen to the iTunes, and Mr. Wayne Stanley is someone who you can go and talk to right now. So bowedigital.com, BOWE digital.com. Talk to Mr. Wayne Stanley. You'll be glad you did, and we'll see you very soon. And thank you very much, Mr. Wayne Stanley, for showing up, stopping by. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Marketer of the Day podcast. Bye for now.